Hello there, I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we will travel to the French countryside in the late autumn of 1917, a place far enough from the front lines that the days move slowly, yet close enough that the faint sound of guns still hums in the air. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Find a comfortable place. Let your breathing slow. This is your time to drift away from the day, to ease into sleep at your own pace. And if you enjoy quiet journeys like this, you can subscribe, so you'll always have another story waiting for you. The camp sits in a shallow valley not far from Verdun, rows of canvas tents stretching toward the low hills, with a field kitchen standing at the edge where the grass meets the dirt track. It is here that a man named Louis begins his day, a cook for the 130th Infantry Regiment, a former baker from Reims who now tends to the meals of soldiers instead of townsfolk. The morning is cool on my face as I step into the kitchen tent, the smell of damp earth mixing with the faint ash of last night's fire. The light is still soft, spilling through the rolled canvas walls, and the camp is quiet save for the distant thud of artillery, far enough away to be only a low memory in the air. I lay my hands on the wooden table where the iron pot and dented ladle wait. Beside a neat row of tin mugs, beneath a folded cloth, rests the bread from yesterday's baking, the crust still dark and firm, holding the faint scent of yeast. The first task is to set the fire. I gather a few pieces of split wood from the stack outside, each one cool and rough to the touch. I arrange them carefully in the stove, placing kindling between the logs, and strike a match. The flame catches slowly, curling around the dry shavings, the faint crackle joining the quiet air of the morning. I crouch beside it for a moment, letting the warmth brush against my face. Outside, the grass still glistens with dew, and a few crows call from the hedgerow beyond the camp. With the fire taking hold, I fetch the water. The pump stands a short walk away, near the supply carts. The metal handle groans softly as I push it down, then lift it again, each stroke bringing a stream of cold, clear water into the tin pail. It is heavy in my hand as I carry it back, the surface rippling with each step, catching the pale light of the rising sun. From a canvas sack under the table, I take out a small handful of coffee beans. Dark and oily, the smell sharp and comforting. I pour them into the grinder and turn the handle slowly, the soft crunch of the beans breaking the stillness. The sound is steady and familiar, a rhythm I have known for years, first in my bakery back in Reims, now here in the quiet space between battles when the water begins to bubble. I pour it over the grounds in the pot, steam rising in slow curls. Carrying the scent through the open air of the kitchen, I hear the first footsteps of the morning, slow and dragging, as men emerge from their tents. They come wrapped in their great coats, collars high, breath misting faintly in the cool air. Tin mugs clink against the table as I fill them one by one, the coffee dark and strong. We share a few quiet greetings, nothing more than a murmured bonjour or a nod. It is too early for conversation, and besides, the coffee speaks well enough on its own. The sun lifts just a little higher, painting the canvas with a soft gold. A patch of light creeps across the grass outside, touching the edges of the crates. Stacked by the supply tent in the distance, the low thud of guns continues, steady and unchanging, almost part of the landscape now. I glance at the bread again, running my hand lightly over the cloth. thinking of the dough I will mix later for tonight's loaves. For now, there is no hurry, only the warmth of the stove, the smell of coffee, and the slow rhythm of a camp waking. To another day, I take a sip from my own mug, letting the bitter taste settle on my tongue. A light breeze slips through the open side of the tent, carrying with it the scent of wet leaves and distant smoke. Somewhere behind me, a soldier hums a few bars of a song from home, barely louder than the sound of the fire. It is a small thing. But in this place, small things are treasures. I close my eyes for just a moment, breathing in the peace of the hour, knowing it may not come again soon. I open my eyes again and take another slow sip, letting the warmth spread through me. The fire crackles softly, settling into a steady burn, the orange glow painting the inside of the stove door. I move a pot onto the grate to heat more water, knowing the next wave of men will be along soon, each with their own mug and their own quiet thoughts. The camp is waking bit by bit, boots scuffing the dirt, a low cough here and there, the faint clink of someone adjusting their gear. From beyond the tents comes the sound of a horse snorting and the creak of a cart being readied. The scent of hay drifts faintly into the kitchen, mixing with the sharper aroma of the coffee. A young soldier steps into the tent, cheeks red from the chill. He nods to me and holds out his mug. I fill it slowly, the dark liquid swirling, steam. Rising into his face, he breathes it in and smiles faintly before retreating to a stool outside. Another joins him, then another, each taking their place in the quiet rhythm of morning. We don't speak much, and when we do it is only of small things, the kind of talk that asks nothing and answers little. Someone remarks on the cold, another on the way the light looks over the fields this morning. It is enough. When the pot is empty, I set it aside and begin preparing the next batch. The beans are low today, so I measure them carefully, making sure to leave enough for later, and the grinding is slower now. Not for lack of strength, but because I enjoy the sound, the steady scrape and crunch, the way it carries just far enough to touch the edges of the camp without breaking the calm. From my seat at the table, I can see the line of hills beyond the tents, their tops just catching the sunlight. The trees there are nearly bare, their branches black against the pale morning sky. A small flock of birds crosses above them, moving in an uneven line toward the south. It reminds me of the journey I took from Reims to this place years ago now, carrying nothing but my kit and a loaf of bread in my bag. The road then seemed long and uncertain, yet it brought me here, to this kitchen, where the days may be hard, but they are mine to fill. A faint bell rings from the far side of camp, calling a few men to duty. Their footsteps fade as they take the road toward the supply depot, the sound replaced by the shuffle of others making their way here for coffee. The tent fills again, the air warm with breath and the scent of the fire. I pour, I listen, I watch. The light move across the canvas. This is how the morning passes, not in haste, but in steady motion, each moment flowing into the next, like the slow turning of the mill back home. When the last of the early risers have gone, I take a moment to step outside the tent. The air is brighter now, the sun lifting just high enough to send a pale gold sheen across the dew-covered grass. From here, the kitchen looks small against the spread of the camp, yet it is the heart of the place in its own quiet way. Men will always come for food and drink, no matter the weather, no matter the war. A wagon rattles by on the track, its wheels creaking, the driver lifting a hand in greeting as he passes. The horse snorts, steam puffing from its nostrils in the cool air, the sound of hooves fading into the distance. I walk to the water pump once more, topping up the pail for the bread dough I will mix later. The handle groans in my hand, the cold metal pressing into my palm, the stream clear, and quick in the morning light. Back inside, I set the pail near the table and take out a sack of flour. Its coarse weave rough against my fingers. The smell is faint but familiar. The scent of home kitchens and early mornings before the bakery doors opened. I measure out what I need, letting it rest in a wide bowl until the time comes to work it. For now the focus is on the simple breakfast that will follow the coffee. A few rounds of bread from yesterday, a wheel of cheese brought in from the supply carts. I cut slowly, the knife sinking into the crust with a soft crack. The slices uneven but generous. The cheese is firm from the cold, pale, and mild. Its scent clean and comforting. I arrange the bread and cheese on a wooden board, ready for the first men who will wander in hungry. The fire has burned down a little, so I add a few more logs, listening to the gentle pop as the sap inside meets the heat. The light in the tent shifts again. As the sun climbs, the canvas glowing faintly. Outside, I hear the rhythmic scrape of someone polishing a boot, the sound carrying between the tents. Somewhere further off, a laugh drifts through the air. Soft and brief, it blends with the steady murmur of the camp, a sound that is neither busy nor still. It is simply alive. I sit for a moment on the low stool near the table, resting my hands on my knees. My mug is empty now, but the taste of the coffee lingers, warm at the back of my throat. I take in the sight of the kitchen as it is now. The tools ready, the fire steady, the morning unfolding at its own pace. There is a comfort in knowing what comes next, in letting the day take shape without forcing it. Here, behind the lines, in this small patch of the French countryside, life moves quietly enough that I can feel each moment pass. Between mouthfuls, I think of the rail map as a breathing thing. Arteries and veins sending iron blood to every limb of the country. Lately, the pulse runs different. More heavy freight to depots, fewer carriages for ordinary folk, the timetable. A quiet ledger of the empire's choices. Even so, the bakery opens, the tram rings. A child presses a mitten to the glass of a toy shop and leaves a small frosted print that pleases him. The world can be both at once. And in this room I keep a small balance by answering cleanly, writing carefully, keeping warmth in the stove and tea in the glass. A call taps in from the seaside station. Wind rising, snow expected by evening. Please repeat the harbor schedule. I send it back in steady strokes. Hours, tides, a brief note that the South Pier lantern was reported dim at dawn. The sounder answers with a neat thanks. I mark the exchange and draw a small dot on the margin, where I will later remind myself to note the lamp tender's visit. The lamp in this room flickers in sympathy when the door settles in its frame. A draft passing, a small breath shared among. Old wood and fire and man, the stove has dulled to a banked orange. I take the shovel, lay 2 coals like chess pieces on the embers, and close the lid with a soft thump. From the peg I lift my coat and hat. The antenna will want a look before. The snow thickens. In the narrow stairwell, the air is colder and sharper. Brick cool to the fingers, steps worn to a gentle scoop by decades of feet. On the roof, the city opens in quiet grays and smoke blue whites. Chimneys exhale in patient plumes. Tram lines score the streets like graphite. The river lies dim under its skin of ice. The aerial wire hums faintly where it runs to the mast. Not a sound you hear as much as feel through glove and bone. A delicate lace of rhyme clings to the insulator. I brush it with a mittened hand until the glass shows and the line sings a little clearer. Down on the street, a sledge slides by, runners sighing against the packed snow. The driver lifts a hand without looking up, reading the shape of a man where he expects a man to be. Wind nudges me once and then lets me be. I take one more slow look at the pale city and climb back down into the small, warm world that is mine. At the desk, the sounder awaits like a faithful bird on a perch. A brief trill, then a line from the junction south asking confirmation of a switch repair. Yes, I answer. Sent at 10, clear by noon. Traffic to resume in order. I note the time, draw a neat blue pin where the work was done. The map looks lighter for it, as though a knot untied has loosened a whole thread. From the ledger's margin, a crumb of bread clings stubbornly. I lift it away with the knife's tip and smile at my own fussy care. Afternoon tilts the light toward a softer tone. The lamp earns its wick again. The window pale with sky that thickens grain by grain. I pull the shade halfway, enough to keep the reflection from the glass where it doubles the lamp into a small twin sun. Messages now are slower, longer, the sort that carry weather and cargo lists rather than sudden news. I like these best. Their patience matches the samovar's measured breath and the stove's even heart. A boy from the yard steps in with his cap pushed back. Cheeks red, breath smoky, a folded slip between his fingers. He leaves it like a bird leaves a twig, nods, and is gone before his heat has time to trouble the room. Inspection notes from the northern belt. Rails sanded at the curve where the river fog lays frost by dawn. All ordinary, all welcome. I answer with a brief acknowledgement, add a small semicolon in the margin the way I do when something is both finished and still connected to what comes next. I think of the cafes where talk is a second winter wind, gusting, dropping, always there, of newsprint that smells of ink and damp wool and the sugar that falls from a pastry you meant to save but did not. Of a city that hums with things unsaid and said again, while here the wire says only what is needed and leaves the rest in the air between taps. Outside the glass, snow thickens from sift to curtain. The world narrows to the street lamp's cone, and the clean line of the step I swept at dawn. I fill the glass again. The spoon sings a light ring against the rim, and then is silent. The tea is darker now, stronger. It steadies the hands and warms the voice when I send a long report eastward. As I work, I hear the lamp chimney click, the stove lid settle, the faint tick-tick from the clock when the pendulum catches a breath and keeps time true. It is a good hour, neither early nor late. A hinge on which the day swings from one gentle half into the next. From the coastal line a longer sheet arrives. Barometer drop confirmed. Harbor to restrict small craft at dusk. Pilots to stand by. I repeat the notice inland to 2 stations that forward the road depots. Their answers arrive with small differences in hand, like signatures from familiar friends. I mark them both, underline once to remind myself to file the duplicates with the weather slips at close. The wire rests again. I sit back, let the chair creak as it wishes, and listen to the kind of quiet that says everything here is in its place. For a moment I think of my mother in a town far from here, of how she wraps jars in old newspapers before sending them by. Real, of how a jar once arrived with the paper intact, and I read the print aloud while eating spoonfuls of plum, simple things carried by long lines and steady hands. The map on the wall is full of such lines, and my work is to keep a few of them unbroken. I set the glass down, touch the key, and wait with the contentment of a man whose next task will announce itself with a small, sure sound. The lamp's flame leans briefly when the outer door moves. A customer from the post counter next door has stepped in to ask if the Southern Express is on time. I tell him it is. The line was clear an hour ago, and no delay reported since. He thanks me with a small tip of his cap. His boots leave neat chevrons in the thin snow at the threshold before the door closes. The warmth returns at once, as if the room itself prefers being left to its own breathing pace. I settle back into my chair, letting the quiet seep in. The wires hum faintly in the walls, a sound like the far-off buzzing of summer bees. On the desk, the ink bottle catches the lamplight, turning the dark blue almost black. Beside it, the nib pen rests ready on the blotter. The smell of ink mixes with the faint tang of coal from the stove. A pairing so familiar, it feels like part of the building's own scent. I sharpen a pencil slowly, the shavings curling in to coiling into pale ribbons that fall into the small tin cup I keep at the corner. Outside, the daylight has thinned to that bluish gray that means evening is near. Snow still falls, but now in thicker, heavier flakes. They land on the window pane and cling for a moment before melting into tiny beads that catch the lamplight. A sledge passes again, the driver now wearing a thick scarf over his mouth. The muffled jingle of the harness bells trails behind him. Somewhere down the street a dog barks once, then twice, before deciding the effort isn't worth the cold. A new message comes through. The station at Vyshny Volokyuk, confirming that the midnight freight has been loaded. I tap back an acknowledgement, each movement of the key crisp and sure. The brass warms slightly under my fingers as the rhythm settles in. The paper strip records the exchange in neat lines of ink. Each mark a small promise that the link between two places remains unbroken. I roll the strip carefully and place it in the tray, aligning it with the others so the day's work keeps its order. Dinner is simple tonight. Cabbage soup that has been warming on the stove's edge since midday. The broth is mild but filling, and the steam carries the faint scent of dill. A slice of dark bread rests on the rim of the bowl, softening at the edge where it dips into the soup. I eat slowly, listening to the occasional pop from the coals and the gentle ticking of the clock on the wall. As the light fades fully, I trim the lamp wick and adjust the shade to keep the glow low and even. The room takes on a golden hue, the kind that makes every corner seem a little closer and warmer. The map on the wall now looks different in the lamplight, the lines softer, the pens glinting faintly like small stars. I let my eyes follow the lines from one pen to another, tracing the imagined path of a message as it travels across towns and rivers. The evening brings fewer signals. The rhythm slows, and with it my own pace. I tidy the desk, stacking the ledgers neatly, brushing away a few crumbs from lunch. The tea glass is filled once more, the dark liquid catching the lamplight as I set it down within easy reach. For a while I simply sit, sipping and listening, content in the knowledge that the night ahead will likely remain calm. From time to time I think of the city beyond these walls, of the quiet streets, the snow-covered roofs, the rare glow of a window. Where someone is still awake, Petrograd has a way of feeling both vast and small on nights like this. The great currents of history moving far beyond my reach, while my own world is measured in wires and words. I am only one operator among many, yet the thought that my small part keeps the greater whole connected brings a quiet pride outside. The snow continues to fall, each flake a silent traveler, making its own brief journey before coming to rest. I wipe my hands on the cloth at my side, the faint dusting of flour clinging to the fabric. From the crate beside me, I take the carrots and onions, their skins rustling as I set them down. The knife moves in slow strokes, cutting the carrots into thick coins, their orange bright against the worn wood. The onions release their sharp scent as I peel and slice them. The layers slick under my fingertips. Each slice falls into the waiting pot, the bottom already coated with a thin layer of oil. From the tin kept in the corner, next comes the meat, salted beef from a barrel in the storage tent. The brine has kept it firm. I cut it into cubes, the blade moving carefully through the grain. It joins the vegetables in the pot, followed by water from the pail and a handful of dried herbs gathered in the summer. The fire accepts it with a faint hiss, the liquid beginning to stir as it warms. Soon it will take on the colors and scents of the ingredients. The broth darkening, the steam rich with the promise of a good meal. I stir it once, twice, then leave it to its own slow work, the lid resting slightly ajar to let the steam escape. The sound is quiet now, just the low simmer of the stew, the crackle of the fire, and the faint rustle of the dough as it shifts in its pan. Outside, a crow calls from somewhere near the hedgerow, its voice carrying clearly before fading into the air. The camp moves at its own pace, and here in the kitchen I move with it. Neither faster nor slower, simply part of the rhythm. There is a comfort in that, in knowing the day will unfold as it always does, one small task at a time. The stew has begun to change, the surface rolling gently as small bubbles break and release their scent into the air. The carrots have softened, their orange now deep and warm. The onions have nearly disappeared into the broth. The meat has given its flavor to the water, turning it rich and dark, a sheen of fat drifting lazily across the surface. Each time I stir, the steam rises in a slow wave, the smell settling into the fabric of my coat and the canvas of the tent. I glance at the dough. Its surface has cracked slightly where the heat has touched it. It has grown, lifting itself higher in the pan. The texture now smooth and soft. Later, I will shape it into smaller loaves and slide them into the field oven. But for now, it rests. There is no need to hurry bread. It will tell you when it is ready. Outside, the light has shifted toward midday. The shadows short and close to the ground. The voices in camp have quieted somewhat. Most men now at their tasks or taking a brief rest. From where I stand, I can see one soldier sitting on an upturned crate, his head bent over a folded letter. He reads slowly, his lips moving just enough to shape the words without sound. A little further off, another man kneels beside a bucket, mending the leather straps on his kit, his fingers moving with practiced care. The breeze brings in the faint scent of hay from the supply wagons, the kind kept for the horses and mules. It mixes with the sharper edge of the stew. and for a moment I am reminded of market mornings in Reims, different times, different streets. Yet the air has that same blend of warm food and earth. I close my eyes briefly. Letting the feeling stay a moment before returning to my work, I check the fire beneath the pot. Adding one small log to keep the heat even, the flames catch at once. Licking along the bark before settling into a steady glow, the crackle is low and soft, a sound that matches the pace of the day. There is a rhythm to cooking here, and I find myself moving in it without thinking. Each step as familiar as breathing. I lift the lid and stir slowly, the spoon moving through the thick broth with a gentle weight. The scent has deepened, carrots sweet and soft, onions melted away, the beef tender against the spoon. I set a row of bowls along the table, their rims warm from the morning sun that slips under the edge of the canvas. Beside them I place a board of bread, the slices a little rough but hearty, and a small tin of salt, just enough for those who want a pinch. The first men arrive without words. They come the way hungry men do when the day is already in motion. I ladle out the stew, one bowl, then another. The steam rises, carrying comfort. To faces that have gone quiet, hands curl around the bowls, knuckles pale for a brief moment as the heat seeps into skin. Shoulders lower a fraction as warmth reaches the chest. A man takes bread and tucks it into his pocket for later. Another breaks his slice and dips it into the broth, the crust turning dark and soft at the edges. Outside the kitchen tent, the benches fill slowly. Not crowded, just dotted with shapes in greatcoats. Spoons scrape softly at tin, a sound like rain on a far roof. Voices rise in low strings and fade again. Someone hums a line of a tune from childhood. Someone else answers with a whistle that never quite finds the melody. It all blends into one easy murmur, the kind of sound a tired mind can rest on without thinking. I keep the line moving, not fast, not slow. Bowl to ladle, ladle to bowl, the rhythm steady as breath. When a man steps forward with a quick nod, I fill his bowl a little higher. He meets my eye and tips his head, and in that brief exchange everything necessary is said. At the end of the table I leave a small plate with the thick ends of the bread, not pretty, but good for those who linger and find a second hunger rising. A light breeze lifts the canvas flap. The smoke from the stove leans outward and thins into the pale noon sky. Between servings I check the dough in its pan. It has risen more, the surface rounded and smooth. I press it lightly with 2 fingers. It yields and slowly springs back, ready to be shaped. I divide it into smaller loaves, each one cupped and turned under the palms until the seams gather beneath. They rest on a dusted board for a short while. Then I carry them to the field oven and slide them inside, the heat a steady pulse against my face. Back at the pot I add a little water to keep the broth at the right depth. One slow circle with the spoon, and the simmer settles again. A pair of horses clop along the track beyond the tent. Harness rings, tapping with each step. The driver raises 2 fingers in greeting as he passes. I nod back and return to the line. A medic steps forward with a crate balanced on a hip. He leaves it near the door and takes a bowl in exchange. The trade understood without a word. By now the benches are a shade emptier. Men rising one by one, setting bowls where I can find them. I gather them in sets of 4 and carry them to the basin. The hot water loosens what the stew has left behind. The E-O-C-D off-deoined. Cloth moves in slow circles over tin. The scrape is soft and regular, like a lullaby spoken instead of sung. When the last spoon is set aside to dry, I lean an elbow on the table and let the quiet reach me. Just for a breath, a patch of sunlight has crept across the ground and now touches the stove's metal skin. A glow makes the iron look almost gentle. I pull the loaves from the oven. The crust dark and crackling, a faint sigh of steam slipping from a seam. When I lift one to cool, the smell is a home by itself. Flour, heat, and time turned into something you can hold. I set the loaves on a rack near the door. The air moves past them in a slow current, and the crust settles with tiny clicks. The stew has reached its quiet end. Only a few servings remain, and those will wait for the late comers who run on the schedule of their duties. I lower the fire to embers and tip the lid so the pot keeps its warmth. A small promise saved for later. From the tent's edge I look out across the camp. The light is high and thin, and the shadows have tucked themselves neatly under everything that stands upright. Two men walk the track with their heads closed together. They speak softly, then fall apart into their own paths as they reach the fork by the supply crates. I take my own portion and sit on the low stool near the entrance. From here the world feels framed, a picture I can step into or away from as needed. The first spoonful is always the best. Maybe because I know exactly what is in it. Maybe because I waited long enough to be hungry. I eat slowly, each mouthful joined to the next by a simple pause. Nothing urgent, nothing left undone that cannot wait these few minutes. The bread still clicks as it cools. Those tiny sounds like the settling of a house after a long day. A letter lies folded in my pocket. It arrived 2 days ago, and I have read it twice. I do not take it out now. It lives well enough in memory, a few lines about early apples and a cousin who found work at the railway. News that is not news. And yet it keeps the world tied together, field to town, mud to stone. I finish the bowl and sit a moment more. The taste of thyme and pepper lingering like a thought that doesn't mind being the last in the room. When I rise, the camp feels hushed again. Not empty, just settled. I stack the dry bowls, fold the cloths, and sweep a palm over the table to gather. The last dusting of flour, the loaves have cooled enough to touch. I line them in a crate with a clean cloth under and over, a small care that keeps them from losing what they gained in the oven. A runner appears and asks if one loaf might go to the medical tent. I nod and place the warmest one in his hands. He thanks me with a small smile and is gone as quietly as he arrived. The afternoon leans in with a softer light, the color of brass worn by many hands. I bank the embers and leave the pot at the gentle edge of heat. It will not boil. It will only keep its kindness for later. From the pump I draw fresh water and fill the basin again. The surface turns from flat to rippled, then back to flat. As it settles, I wash the ladle last. Its weight familiar in my hand, the curve of it as known to me as my own palm. There is a stretch of time now that belongs to no one in particular. The best kind of hour, I carry a heel of bread to the doorway and lean against the post, breaking off small pieces and letting them soften on my tongue. Beyond the camp, the fields are a pale green, stitched with brown, and a line of trees holds a thin chorus of leaves that have not yet fallen. A crow lifts from the hedgerow and sails across the open ground. One slow wing beat for every few heartbeats, then a glide that seems to take no effort at all. I think of the bakery in Reims, of mornings when the ovens glowed like dawn, even before the sun rose, of customers who spoke quietly before the day claimed their voices for more urgent work, of trays lined with loaves that cooled while the city stretched and yawned itself awake. There is a kinship between that room and this tent. Flour and fire, patience and care, the steady hands that turn simple things into something that steadies other people. A shadow moves at the corner of the tent, and I look up. It is only the canvas shifting as the breeze decides another direction somewhere. A whistle sounds, not sharp, just a signal that something small has started or ended. I set the bread aside and wash my hands in a tin bowl, the water cool and clean. The feeling of it rinses away the last warmth of the bowl from my fingers. When I dry them on the cloth, the threads catch lightly at a knuckle, and in that tiny tug I feel a whole day's work gathering itself neatly. By late afternoon, I will warm what remains of the stew and cut the first loaf into thick slices. A small meal for those who come back to the kitchen. When the light thins, I will check the stove, brush the ash pan, and stack a few logs within easy reach. Small things that make the evening smooth. I will tie the sack of flour and set the empty tins upside down so the night air does not settle in them. And when the sky begins to deepen toward blue, I will open the door a little wider to let the last of the daylight walk through the tent and out again. For now I stand quietly, letting the camp speak in low threads around me. A harness jingle here, a laugh there, a cough that fades as a man turns away. The day is unchanged by my watching, and yet it changes me. It reminds me that a steady hand and a warm bowl can turn noise into music. I take one step back inside, feel the stove's gentle breath on my shins, the kind of warmth that does not demand attention, it simply stays. The bread waits in its crate, the pot hums at a whisper, the table is clear and ready, and the afternoon rests on its hinge, poised to close softly into evening. The afternoon leans gently toward evening. The light thins until the edges of things seem softer and closer. I open the stove and rake the embers into a bright bed, then lay 2 split logs across them so the flame wakes without hurry. The pot with the last of the stew comes back to the grate. A little water to loosen it, a slow stir to bring it back to life. From the crate I lift a loaf that has cooled just enough to slice. The crust sings quietly under the knife. A click here, a faint sigh there. I lay a few pieces on a wire near the mouth of the stove. The heat toasts the faces of the bread until they color like dusk. There are onions left in the bundle. I take 2 and slice them thin. In the smaller pot, a spoon of fat melts to a clear shine. The onions fall in and turn pale, then golden, giving off a sweetness that feels like warmth made into scent. A ladle of broth from the big pot follows, a pinch of salt, a whisper of time. The little soup settles into a soft simmer beside its older brother. I taste with the back of the spoon. The flavor is simple and kind, the sort that does not ask for attention. It just steadies you. Outside, the camp takes on its evening voice. Tools are put away, straps checked once more, words spoken a little lower as the air cools. A quartermaster passes the door with a crate of bottles for the ration. He pauses, we exchange a nod, and he leaves a small bundle of measuring cups on the table. Later, when the men drift back, I will pour a modest measure into each tin and add a splash of water, the red darkening to a quiet shade, something friendly to carry them into night. The first to return are the ones whose tasks end early. They come with an easy tiredness, not the heavy kind. I give them stew and the toasted bread. A cup of the onion soup for those who ask, with a glance toward the small pot. They sit close to the doorway where the last of the light gathers. Bowls cupped in both hands, breath rising in soft strands that fade as the soup warms them. A man says thank you, without moving his mouth much. Another taps 2 fingers to the rim of his bowl and looks out across the track as if the fields themselves had cooked the meal. Lanterns appear one by one along the path, their circles of yellow overlapping like gentle ripples on still water. I hang one from the beam above the table. Its glow lays a gold line along the ladle and turns the steam into a slow ribbon. The canvas shifts as the breeze turns colder. The flap lifts and falls with a calm that feels like the stove breathing. I serve the small wine ration now, just enough to soften the edges of the day. Each cup tips in a quiet salute, not to anything grand, just to the warmth shared here. Someone hums under his breath and another answers with a few notes. The tune is thin and wandering, yet it finds a place to rest between the flame and the night air. When the bowls begin to come back, I stack them in patient piles. The metal rings lightly as each one settles on the next. The basin fills with warm water. I wash without hurry, circles and sways, cloth and tin, a soft scrape like rain far away. On the table I spread a clean cloth and line up the knives and mugs for morning. There is comfort in seeing them ready, quiet as sleeping tools. I step to the door and let my eyes find the sky. A first star stands above the dark line of the hills. Somewhere a horse stamps once, twice. Leather tugs and then rests. The distant guns offer a single low echo and fall silent again. The sound folds into the night like a wave that chooses not to break. Back inside, I lift the little pot and pour what remains of the onion soup into a tin for the late comer I know will arrive. The large pot is nearly empty now. I leave it at the edge of the grate so the last heat keeps it gentle until the final guest appears. The bread in the crate gives one last click as a crust cools the last of the way. I cover the loaves with the cloth and smooth it once with the back of my hand. I note tomorrow's needs in a small book kept by the lantern. Flour enough for another baking, oats for the early meal, onions and carrots to be fetched from the storage tent, a little coffee held back for those who wake before the sun. The letters are simple, just reminders to the morning version of me, who will read them and nod. I close the book and rest my hand on it for a moment. It holds the shape of the day like a palm print that lingers on water. A figure appears at the doorway, late but expected. I hand him the tin without words, and he smiles with his eyes. He stands under the lantern and eats slowly. When he finishes, he leaves the spoon beside the basin and lifts a hand in thanks, then steps back into the soft ring of light outside. I bank the fire so it will sleep rather than vanish. The coals settle with a faint rustle, warm as a held thought. The lantern hums almost too quietly to hear. Its flame steady, its glass faintly warm when I pass my palm near. Night has taken the camp in a kind way. Not heavy, not stern, just a blanket laid across everything that needs rest. I breathe in the mingled scents of bread, smoke, and broth. The day becomes a single gentle taste on the tongue. There will be another morning, and another kettle, and another line of tin mugs. But for now, there is a quiet kitchen at the edge of the fields, a steady stove, and the soft company of men who know the worth of warmth. If you're ready, let the night carry you a little further. Let the breath lengthen, let the shoulders lower, let the small sounds fade until they are simply part of sleep. The lantern's circle of light grows softer as the oil thins. Its glow turns the canvas a calm honey color. I loosen the ties at the doorway so the flap rests half open, enough to let the night air move through in an easy drift. The stove gives a last low whisper each time a coal collapses inward. Small sounds that feel like the kitchen breathing in sleep. I fold the clean cloths and lay them in a neat stack. Knives wiped, mugs aligned, ladle hung, where my hand will find it without thought at first light. Outside, the camp has settled into the hush that belongs to sentries and sleepers. Boot steps pass at a measured pace along the track. The leather speaks softly with each stride, then fades, then returns. Somewhere a mule shifts in its traces, and the harness gives a single jingle. Then all is still again. The air smells of damp grass and old smoke, a thin thread of river scent drifting in from the low ground beyond the hedgerow. I step out beneath the open sky. The stars are clear, scattered like salt over dark cloth. A pale band leans from one horizon to the other, the kind of light that needs darkness to be seen at all. Far away, the guns give one distant murmur, and then nothing more. The night heaps what it wants and lets the rest fall away. I stand with my hands in my coat and breathe until the cool has reached the places that worked hard today. Shoulders, wrists, the pads of the palms back inside. I bank the stove once more. 2 slow strokes with the iron and a careful pull of the ash, so heat will linger without flame. I wet a corner of a cloth and wipe the table in wide, gentle arcs. Flour dust rises and settles like a soft fog in lantern light. The dough bowl is scrubbed and turned upside down to dry. The scraper set beside it, its edge dulled by honest work. From the sack I pinch a little flour into a small crock and stir in water with a spoon. A simple start that will be a better loaf tomorrow if the night stays kind. At the far end of the tent, my cot waits under a folded blanket, canvas stretched tight over a wooden frame that creaks when I sit. I unlace one boot, then the other. The knots loosen with the quiet relief of things that have held long enough. My feet find the cool of the ground and the warmth of wool in the same breath. Small comforts that weigh more than they seem. I set the boots side by side, toes forward like 2 patient dogs. A habit that says morning will come and I will be ready when it does. A sentry pauses at the doorway and tips his cap. I return the nod and offer the last cup of onion soup from the tin kept near the stove. He takes it with both hands and drinks without haste. When he hands it back, his thanks is only a breath shaped into a word. He moves on, and the night closes behind him like water, leaving only the faint trace of leather and wool in the air. I lie back and the cot shifts once, then settles. The blanket comes up to my chest and holds there. The lantern hums in its quiet way. I turn the key and the flame lowers to a patient seed of light. The stove answers with a soft hush as the metal gives up the last of its heat to the room. Warmth without brightness, a comfort that asks for nothing in return. From outside, a low call. travels from one post to the next. A simple exchange, 2 words and then silence. The camp reminding itself that it is watched and safe. Sleep does not rush here. It gathers the way dough rises, slow and sure. I let the day list itself in the order it wants. Coffee and knives, water and oats, hands and faces, voices near and far. The tune that never quite found its way. Each thought comes, bows, and leaves. None of them in a hurry, none of them pressing to be first. The mind is a room with a door propped open. The night air passes through it, and everything that does not belong slips out without resistance. A breeze lifts the edge of the canvas and brings in the cold scent of the fields. Afterwards the air stands still again, heavy with quiet. Somewhere a fox calls once from the hedge, and then decides it has said enough. Near my head, the bread crate gives the tiniest click as a crust finishes its last change. Even cooling makes a music if you listen long enough. I think of Reims only as far as the color of morning on old stone. Then even that picture sets itself down and grows light. If you are awake beside me in this small tent, let your breath match the slow rise and fall of the stove's warmth. Let the body choose softness wherever it can. If you are drifting at the door where the lantern draws a thin gold line on the ground, step a little further into the dark that holds you kindly. The night will carry the camp until dawn asks for it back. Nothing here needs your labor now. Not the pot, not the cloths, not the fire. There is only the blanket, the cot, and the space between heartbeats that opens wide when you let it. When morning comes, I will wake to the faintest light under the flap and the blackbird calling from the hedge. The water will go on to boil, and the grinder will turn. The sack will give its flour, the spoon will stir, the men will arrive with their mugs and leave with warmth in their hands. The lantern's wick burns lower, but I keep it lit. Its small circle of light anchors the space between night and morning. I pull the blanket higher and rest for a time, not to sleep yet, just to let the muscles settle into the rhythm of the cot. From outside comes the slow tread of another sentry, his steps steady and deliberate, pausing at the post before turning back the way he came. Somewhere near the far edge of camp, a door on a supply wagon shifts with the wind, the hinge giving a single dry sigh before it rests again. I sit up after a while and swing my legs over the side. The air inside the tent is cooler now, but the stove still holds enough warmth to take the edge off. From the crate I take a heel of bread and break it with my hands. The crust firm, but the inside soft, faintly sweet from the long bake. I eat it in small pieces, letting each one rest on my tongue before I chew. Bread has its own kind of conversation. Slow, patient, and always worth listening to. On the table, the ladle rests in the clean basin. Its handle catching the lantern light, I trace a finger along its curve. The metal is smooth from years of use, each small mark and dent a quiet record of meals served. Beside it, the grinder sits with a few beans waiting in the bottom. I turn the handle once, twice, not enough to wake the camp, just to feel the movement. The faint scent of coffee rises. Even cold, it carries a promise. I step outside for a moment. Pulling my coat close, the camp is nearly still now. Only the slow nod of a horse tethered near the wagon and the faint clink of a chain from the tool rack by the storage tent. The stars above are sharper in the colder air. They seem closer somehow, as if the space between here and there has thinned. I breathe until the cold settles deep enough to feel clean. then turn back toward the soft glow of the kitchen tent. Inside, the claws are dry, the knives ready, the table clear. Everything in its place for when the first light comes. I pour a little water from the pail into a mug and drink slowly, the coolness a quiet counterpoint to the bread's warmth. In the corner, the dough starter in its crock gives a faint bubble, alive in its own way, working without needing to be watched. It will be ready for the flour come morning. Another small task that will shape the day. The cot waits, but I do not take it yet. There is a peace in these in-between hours. The camp breathing slow, the stove holding its last heat, the lantern swaying just enough to remind me there is still a world outside the canvas. I sit again on the stool by the table, elbows resting lightly, watching the shadow of the ladle stretch across the cloth. Each moment folds into the next without hurry, and the night carries on. A faint rustle comes from just beyond the tent flap. Not hurried, not sharp, just the sound of boots in grass. A figure appears in the doorway, silhouetted against the darker night behind him. It's one of the stable hands, his cap pulled low. He asks quietly if there's any bread left, his voice carrying the polite weight of someone not wanting to trouble the cook after hours. I lift the cloth from the crate and pass him a smaller loaf. It's still faintly warm in the center, and he smiles as though the heat itself is a gift. He tucks it into his coat and offers thanks before slipping back into the night, the flap swaying once and then settling still. I listen a moment to the sound of his steps fading toward the stables. The steady rhythm blends with the low murmur of a horse shifting in its stall. The air that comes in with him lingers. Cooler, carrying a trace of hay and leather, I let it move through the tent before it dissolves into the softer scent of flour, wood, and the last whisper of smoke from the stove. The lantern sways slightly on its hook, its light making the shadows on the canvas walls move like slow water. I take the grinder in hand and turn it a few times, enough to ready a small measure of coffee, for when the first light comes. The beans crack and crumble under the burr, the sound a soft echo in the quiet space. I leave them in the tin with the lid loose. The scent will greet me before the sun does. At the stove, the embers have settled into a red that breathes rather than burns. I stir them gently with the iron, feeling the dry heat rise into my face. The kind that holds steady without demanding more wood. The glow catches the rim of the kettle and makes it shine faintly. I fill it halfway from the pail, so it will be ready to boil in the morning. It sits there now, quietly waiting, metal cool above the slow pulse of the coals. I glance toward the crock on the table. The dough starter bubbles again, a small, steady sound. It's alive in the way bread always is, before it becomes bread, working in silence, shaping itself without hands. I cover it lightly with the cloth and set it closer to the stove, where the warmth will keep it content until dawn. Outside, a low call passes between two sentries. The words are too soft to catch, but the tone is enough to say all is well. The breeze stirs again, slipping under the canvas edge, brushing against my ankles before it moves upward to tug at the lantern's flame. I settle deeper on the stool, hands resting loosely on my knees. The night holds, unbroken, stretching forward like a road with no need to be walked just yet. Somewhere far off, an owl calls once. The sound is low and rounded, carrying easily through the still air before fading into the dark. I glance toward the doorway, but the camp lies quiet. Only the lanterns at the far end of the track burn faintly, their glow resting in small pools on the ground. A mule shifts its weight in the hitching post near the supply wagons. The leather creaks softly. Then there is only the steady sound of breathing. It is a night without hurry, the kind that feels as though it has no edge, no fixed beginning or end, only a slow turning from one shade of quiet into another. I rise from the stool and step outside. The air greets me with the clean scent of damp earth and faint wood smoke. The sky has cleared even more, the stars sharp and bright, and the pale strip of the Milky Way lies across the dark like a river seen from above. The cool settles over my face and hands, and I stand there for a time, letting the sounds of the camp find their way to me. The occasional clink of metal from a watch post, the whisper of canvas as a tent shifts in the light wind, the faint pop of an ember carried from some other fire. When I return inside, the stove still holds its glow. I lay one more small stick of wood across the coals, not to rouse a flame, but to keep the warmth breathing. The kettle waits on the grate, its handle warm but not hot. I touch it lightly before turning away. On the table, the cloth-covered crock rises just slightly at the center, a sign that the starter has been working well. I adjust the cloth and leave it be, knowing that by morning it will be ready to meet the flour. I take my coat from its peg and shake it out gently. A few specks of flour drift down into the lantern light, catching like pale dust motes before they vanish. Hanging it back, I smooth the sleeves and glance once more round the tent. The bowls stacked, knives in order, cloths folded, the bread crate covered. There is nothing here out of place, nothing left untended. The kitchen sleeps as easily as any man in the camp tonight. I sit once more, elbows resting lightly on the table. The lantern sways a fraction as the wind outside changes direction, and the shadows on the canvas shift with it. It is a small reminder that even in stillness, the world moves. Slowly, quietly, but always on, the night holds steady until the faintest silver begins to touch the edge of the canvas. It is not enough to wake the camp yet, just a suggestion that the dark is beginning to thin. I stand and cross to the stove, lifting the kettle onto the heart of the embers. They respond with a soft glow, as though pleased to be asked for warmth again. The air inside the tent is cool, but not biting. The stove will change that soon enough. I add a handful of wood, watching the first thin tongues of flame slip between the logs. Outside, the camp is still in its low breathing. One or two figures move along the track, early duties or men, unable to sleep, their steps careful not to wake the rest. Somewhere a horse stamps once, the sound muffled by the damp earth. I draw a pail of fresh water from the pump, the handle groaning in the quiet, and bring it inside, setting it beside the table where the flour waits. The crock of starter has risen well overnight. Its surface is smooth and faintly domed. I stir it with a wooden spoon, the texture springing back in slow folds, alive and ready. The flour joins it in the large bowl. I work it together, water a little at a time, salt just enough to wake the flavor. My hands fold and press, turn and fold again, the dough warming under my palms as the gluten stretches. It is work that carries no weight in the mind, only the steady motion and the feel of something taking shape. When it is ready, I set it aside beneath a cloth to rise. By then, the kettle is singing low. I grind the coffee, the soft crunch filling the tent in place of words. The scent sharpens the air, curling into every corner. The first soldier arrives as the water begins to boil. He offers his mug without a word, and I fill it. He stands for a moment by the doorway, warming his hands, before stepping back into the pale light that is slowly growing outside. More follow. Not in a rush, but in the steady trickle that marks the start of the day. Each takes coffee, sometimes a piece of yesterday's bread. The benches begin to fill, the quiet broken only by the scrape of a mug on wood, the soft sigh of breath meeting. Steam, beyond them, the camp begins to turn in earnest. Boots on packed earth, canvas flaps lifting, the clink of gear being buckled and straps pulled tight. I check the dough. It is already changing, the surface smoother, the body lighter beneath the cloth. The stew pot from yesterday is cleaned and ready. The vegetables set out for cutting. Soon, I will light the second fire and begin the slow simmer that will carry use toward midday, but for now, the morning still belongs to coffee, bread, and the quiet minutes before the day claims its full weight. I slice the last of yesterday's loaves into thick pieces. The crust still firm, the inside soft and faintly sweet from the long bake. Each slice is laid on a board beside the coffee pot. Men take them with a nod, some tucking the bread into their coats to eat on the way to their duties. A light breeze slips through the open flap of the tent, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and the sharper edge of coal smoke from another stove in camp. Somewhere nearby, a wagon creaks as its load shifts. The driver murmurs to the mule, his voice low and even. At the table, I pull the bundle of carrots closer, the skin still dusted with soil from storage. The knife works in slow, steady strokes, cutting each one into thick coins that fall into the waiting pot. The onions follow, their papery skins giving way to the smooth, cool layers beneath. The scent rises sharp but familiar. I stir them together with a wooden spoon, letting them rest until the fire is ready to take them. The dough in its bowl has risen higher now, soft and airy under the cloth. I press it gently, feeling it yield, and then slowly return to shape. It will need another short rest before shaping into loaves. The stove's warmth will carry it the rest of the way. I dust the board with flour and leave it waiting, the pale surface smooth and ready outside. The sound of the camp has grown. Tools clinking, muted laughter between two men, the muffled thud of boots on the track. A whistle sounds from the far side, not urgent, just a mark in the day's routine, and fades into the breeze. The light has strengthened, pulling the colors from the fields beyond. Greens muted by autumn, browns deep where the soil shows through. I take a moment at the doorway, letting the cool air touch my face before returning to the stove. The fire greets the pot with a faint hiss as I set it down, the scent of onions rising quickly as they meet the heat. I stir once, twice, then add water from the pail, the surface rippling before settling into a slow roll. The carrots bob and turn, catching the light and the broth. I add the meat in careful cubes, salted, from the barrel. It sinks slowly, the darker edges softening as the liquid takes hold. This will be the day's meal. It will carry its warmth well into the afternoon. For now it begins its quiet work, the lid resting slightly askew to let the steam wander out into the morning air. I wipe my hands on the cloth at my side and glance again toward the dough. Soon it will be time to shape it, but the stew needs only the smallest attention, just a stir now and then, so I can let it simmer while the camp moves steadily around me. I step back to the table and uncover the dough. It has risen just enough to be worked. The surface is smooth, faintly warm from the stove nearby. I lift it onto the floured board and press it gently. The air inside escapes in a slow sigh as I fold it over itself, turning, folding again, each motion unhurried. I divide it into smaller loaves, tucking the seams underneath so they hold their shape. They rest now under a light cloth, waiting for the oven's heat to be ready. The stew gives a soft pop under its lid. I lift it to check, the steam rising and wrapping around my face. The scent is deeper already, onions sweet, carrots softened, meat turning tender in the slow boil. A few dried herbs from the small pouch in my pocket crumble between my fingers and drift into the pot. They darken almost at once, releasing a faint edge of rosemary and thyme into the air. I stir slowly, letting the spoon scrape the bottom to free what has settled there. Outside, the camp continues its rhythm. Men pass with bundles of firewood. Another carries a crate toward the storage tent. Two voices trade a short tune back and forth, never quite finishing the melody. From somewhere beyond the track comes the uneven clatter of a cart making its way toward the depot. The sound fades, leaving only the steady hum of the camp layered over the quiet bubbling of the pot. I glance at the loaves. They have puffed a little more under the cloth, ready now for the oven. The field oven sits just beyond the tent, its stone surface still holding some warmth from the previous day. I feed it small fire with dry wood, watching the flame curl up and draw the smoke through the flue. When the heat feels right, I slide the loaves inside. The crust to be already beginning to firm under the first touch of heat. Back at the stove, I give the stew another stir. The broth now a rich, dark color, carrying the scent of the herbs through the tent. A ladle dips in and comes up heavy, the pieces of meat soft enough to break with a spoon. I set the lid back, leaving it tilted to let the steam out slowly. Too much heat would rush it, and this is a meal that prefers time. There is nothing more it needs for the moment, only patience and the quiet watch of the cook. The oven breathes its heat into the loaves. I can hear the faint clicks of the crust forming. The smell drifts back into the tent, warm and rich, curling over the scent of the stew until the two seem woven together. I fetch a small bundle of potatoes from the storage crate. Their skins still carry a trace of the earth. A quick rinse in the basin leaves the water clouded. The potatoes now pale and clean in my hands. I cut them into thick pieces and let them slip into the pot, where they sink slowly into the broth. The stew accepts them without a change in voice. The simmer continues, steady as before. Outside, a small group of soldiers gathers near the benches. Some sit, some lean on their rifles. They speak in low tones, the words carrying no urgency, only the slow exchange of familiar voices. One of them laughs softly at something, the sound brief and without sharpness. It joins the other sounds of the camp, the creak of a cartwheel, the dull knock of wood being stacked, the breeze lifting the edge of a canvas flap. I step to the doorway for a moment, feeling the air shift against my face. It carries the scent of leaves, damp and close to falling. The fields beyond the camp are touched with a light that makes every color softer. Somewhere far off, a train gives a single long call. It stretches into the distance until it is only a thread in the air. When I turn back inside, the steam from the stew greets me like a slow exhale. The loaves are ready. I draw them out and set them on the cooling rack. The crust is dark and strong, the bottoms a warm gold. A faint crackle runs along them as the air meets the heat inside. I cover them loosely with a cloth so they keep their warmth without losing their crisp edge. It is nearly midday now. The camp's movement grows a little quicker as men finish their morning tasks. I set the bowls in a line along the table, ladle resting in the pot, bread ready on the board. The first man comes in, drawn more by the smell than the call. His hands are ready before he even speaks. I fill his bowl, the broth swirling around the meat and vegetables. He takes a slice of bread and moves aside for the next in line. Soon the benches are filling, the scrape of spoons and the quiet tearing of bread mingling in the air. Men lean over their bowls, the steam rising into their faces. Some close their eyes for a moment before the first bite. The talk is low, more pauses than words. It is a sound I know well, the calm of a meal that asks nothing more than to be eaten. I serve until the line thins, then sit with my own bowl. The heat of it reaches my hands before the taste reaches my tongue. The bread is soft inside, crisp at the crust. The stew rich and steady in its flavor. Outside, the sunlight falls evenly over the camp. No harsh shadows, no glare, just a light that lets everything be seen as it is. When I finish, I set the bowl aside and take up the cloth, ready to begin the slow work of washing and setting the kitchen in order again. I carry the first stack of empty bowls to the basin, the metal cool and smooth beneath my fingers. The water in the basin is warm from the kettle I poured over it. A curl of steam rises each time a bowl slips under. The cloth moves in slow circles, loosening the trace of stew from the tin. Each clean bowl rests upside down on the table, the faint ring of metal on wood marking its place in the line outside. The benches clear little by little. Some men drift back toward their posts. Others pause to speak in the shade of the supply tent. A few linger with the last pieces of bread in hand, breaking them into smaller and smaller bites as though stretching the quiet along with the meal. The sound of boots fades into the wider hum of the camp. A hammer tapping somewhere distant, a horse pulling against its traces, the ripple of a canvas wall in the breeze. When the last bowl is washed, I tip the water out onto the grass behind the tent. It darkens the ground for a moment before sinking away. The ladle is rinsed and dried, the knives wiped clean and set beside the board. I fold the cloth and hang it on the peg near the stove, its damp edges already cooling in the afternoon air. The pot still holds enough stew for those who will come later. I slide it to the cooler edge of the fire so it will keep warm without boiling away. The loaves under the cloth are still faintly warm. I set one aside on a smaller board for the medical tent. A runner will come for it before the evening, as they always do. With the kitchen in order, I step to the doorway. The sunlight has softened, leaning into the gold of late afternoon. The fields beyond the camp seem quieter now, though nothing has truly changed. The same low hills, the same pale trees holding their last leaves. I watch a pair of pigeons circle once over the hedgerow before settling out of sight. The air carries a touch of coolness that hints at the night ahead. I return to the stove and stir the pot once more. The broth moves slowly, thickened by the hours. The smell is deeper now. The herbs folded fully into the meat and vegetables. I taste a small spoonful. It holds the same calm as the morning, but richer, as though it has gathered something from the day itself. I cover it again, letting the steam escape in a thin, steady thread. There is still light enough for small tasks. I sweep the floor with slow strokes, the bristles catching crumbs and stray bits of flour. The sound is soft and steady, matching the measured breath of the fire. When the last of the dust is gathered and carried outside, the tent feels a little more still, a little more ready for the evening to come. I step outside with the small pile of sweepings, scattering them into the grass where the breeze will take them. The air is cooler now. The sun sits lower, its lights slanting across the camp in long amber lines. Shadows stretch from the wagons and tents, touching one another until the spaces between are thin. Some men walk the track in pairs, speaking quietly. Others move alone, their eyes on the ground, their thoughts kept close. From the stables comes the sound of a brush working through a horse's coat. Slow and even, the animal shifts its weight and gives a low huff, the harness jingling softly before settling. Beyond that, a woodcutter works near the edge of camp, his axe striking in a steady rhythm, each cut followed by a short pause before the next. The sound carries easily in the cooling air, fading only when the breeze turns toward the fields. I return to the kitchen tent and check the bread under the cloth. The crust is firm now, the loaves fully cooled. One is lifted into a small crate lined with clean cloth for the medical tent. Another I set aside for the early risers tomorrow. The rest will be cut later for the evening meal, thick slices too. Soak up what remains of the stew. The fire is banked a little higher now, the flames steady but not fierce. I want it ready when the last of the men return. I stir the pot again. The broth moves heavily, rich with the day's work. The meat soft enough to break with the ladle. The smell fills the tent without pressing. Warm, familiar, and unchanging. It is the kind of scent that lets you know you are in the right place, at the right time, with the right work in your hands. Outside, the lanterns along the main track are being lit. One by one, their glow reaches into the edges of camp. The light pools at the bases of the poles, leaving the space between them to the shadow. The day's last color lingers only in the sky, a narrow band of deep orange sliding toward gray. A cool wind moves through the open side of the tent, stirring the cloth on the table and lifting a faint thread of steam from the stew. I set the bowls back in their places along the table, ready for the evening serving. The knives are laid out. Beside the board, the bread within easy reach. There is no rush. The men will come as the light fades, drawn by the warmth. Until then, the kitchen waits, steady and prepared, the fire breathing in a slow and even rhythm. The first of the evening crowd arrives just as the light slips from the sky. A pair of men step in together, their boots leaving faint prints in the packed earth at the doorway. They offer quiet nods before holding out their bowls. I fill each one with a ladle deep enough to bring both broth and meat. The steam curls upward, carrying the scent of herbs and slow-cooked vegetables. Each man takes a slice of bread from the board, tucking it under an arm as they find seats on the benches outside. More follow in a steady trickle. The murmur of low conversation mixes with the scrape of spoons on tin. One man leans back with his eyes half closed, holding his bowl close to his chest between bites. Another dips his bread into the stew until it's heavy with broth, letting it rest a moment before taking a bite. The air near the benches is warm, despite the evening chill, the glow from the lanterns settling over the small gathering like a blanket. Inside, I keep the line moving, the ladle rising and falling in a calm, measured rhythm. Each serving feels the same in the hand, and yet each is its own small exchange. A nod, a murmured mercy, a brief meeting of eyes. The bread grows lighter on the board, the pot a little lower with each pour, but there is enough for all who come, and a little set aside for those whose duties keep them until later. From the doorway I can see the camp in its night shape, shadows pooling between the tents, lantern light stretching in thin lines along the track. Somewhere a sentry's voice carries a short greeting to another. The reply comes back just as quietly. The air is sharper now, each breath carrying the cool of the open fields beyond. The warmth of the stove feels stronger by contrast, the kind that seeps into the hands and stays there. When the last of the main crowd is eaten, I draw the pot to the cooler side of the fire. The remaining loaves are cut into halves and set on the board, wrapped in cloth to keep the heat in. Outside, the bench is empty, leaving only the soft marks of boots in the dirt. The sounds of camp settle into their night rhythm, the slow tread of patrol, the quiet talk between men sharing the last minutes before rest. I wash the first wave of bowls, the water warm and scented faintly of the stew. The cloth moves in small circles, the scrape soft and even. Each bowl is dried and stacked, the metal catching the lantern light and dull reflections. The tent is quieter now, but not empty. There is still a place for the latecomers, and the fire will wait for them as I do. A little while passes before the flap lifts again. Two figures step in from the dark, their coats carrying the cold with them. The edges of the fabric damp from the night air. They place their bowls on the table without a word, and I fill them as I have all evening, the ladle dipping deep so they leave with enough warmth to last the hours ahead. One takes his bread and sits just inside the tent where the stove's glow reaches him. The other remains standing near the doorway, eating slowly while looking out toward the line of lanterns along the track. When they finish, they set their bowls back on the table and thank me in the quiet way soldiers do. A nod, a small lift of the hand. I add their dishes to the basin and hear the water shift and lap against the tin. Outside, the wind has grown a little stronger, brushing past the canvas walls with a low, steady sound. It carries the smell of wet earth and wood smoke from somewhere further down the camp. A single drop of water falls from the flap where the fabric has caught the damp, landing with the faintest tap on the packed earth floor. The stew is nearly gone now. What remains rests at the bottom in a thick layer. I stir it once, not to serve, but to let the last of the warmth spread evenly. Through it, this will be for the sentry who makes the final round. The bread is nearly finished, too. Just two halves remain under the cloth, the crust still holding its shape. I press the cloth over them gently, the warmth still faintly trapped beneath. The lantern above sways in the draft from the open flap. Its light moves over the table, over the stacked bowls, over the smooth wood where the board has been cleared. I take a moment to simply stand and watch the shadows shift. They move like slow water, always in motion, yet never hurrying. The sound of boots approaches from outside, steady and unbroken. A tall figure appears at the doorway, his breath showing in the light as he steps in. It is the last sentry of the night. I hand him the final bowl without him needing to ask. He accepts it with both hands and sits on the stool by the fire. We do not speak. The quiet is enough. Only the occasional clink of the spoon against tin breaks the stillness. When he finishes, he leaves the bowl on the table and steps back into the night. The flap falls closed behind him, and the tent is mine again. Holding its warmth against the dark outside, I let the flap rest closed now. The stove's glow feels stronger without the wind pushing through. The embers shift and settle, giving off a steady red light that pools beneath the grate. I take the last of the warm water from the kettle and pour it into the basin. The single bowl from the sentry is washed slowly, the sound of the cloth against the tin soft and regular. When it's clean, I set it upside down with the others, the stack neat and ready for the morning. The bread crate is light in my hands as I move it to the corner. Only the two halves remain. I lean back slightly on the stool, letting my gaze settle on the slow pulse of the embers. They shift in their bed of ash, glowing deeper with each faint breath of air that moves through the stove door. The heat they give is steady, not the rush of a new fire, but the kind that holds its place through the long hours. Outside, a lantern sways on its hook, casting a moving shadow across the canvas wall. The flicker is gentle, like the rhythm of a slow heartbeat. Somewhere far beyond the camp, an owl calls once. The sound carries clear in the stillness. The answer comes from further off, the two voices meeting and then fading into the dark. I picture the fields they fly over, furrows dark with damp earth, patches of grass silvered by the moonlight. Even here, where the war runs through every day, the land keeps its own quiet pace. The trees grow, the rivers move, and the night holds steady above it all. I rise to check the stove. Giving the embers a small turn with the poker, they flare, slightly sending up a faint crackle before settling again. The pot on the cooler edge still holds its weight of broth. I tip it gently to see the slow movement inside. It will be enough for the morning's first meal, perhaps for the men who leave before the sun. I replace the lid, the sound of metal meeting metal soft and sure. From the peg I take my coat and drape it loosely over my shoulders. The air has grown cooler still. The canvas walls hold much of the warmth, but the edges of the night creep in regardless. I pour myself a small cup of the tea left in the kettle. It is mild now, but still warm enough to carry comfort. The first sip is quiet on the tongue, the second slower, the heat moving down to meet the center of me. I let it rest in my hands between sips, feeling the shape of the tin and the small weight it carries. Beyond the flap, the camp lies in near total stillness. Only the slow pacing of the sentry marks the hours. His boots sound on the packed ground, fade, and return, always in the same even measure. It is a sound I have come to know as much as the breath of the fire or the stirring of the pot, the kind of sound that tells you the night is in order, and all is as it should be. I finish the last sip of tea and set the cup down on the table. Its faint ring against the wood seems louder in the hush of the tent. The warmth lingers in my hands, even after the cup is empty, a small echo of the stove's steady heat. I pull the coat closer and let my shoulders ease. There is no need to hurry into the next moment. The night allows for stillness. The lantern's glow has softened, its light drifting across the canvas in slow waves as the wind moves outside. Shadows of the stove pipe and hanging utensils stretch and shrink, their outlines blurring. I find myself watching them without thought, the way one watches drifting clouds, not searching for meaning, just letting the shapes pass in their own time. The fire pops once, a single spark lifting and fading before it can touch the grate. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle carries through the dark, faint, stretched thin by the miles. but clear enough to stir a memory of the last supply run. Men unloading crates, the sound of boots on the platform, the smell of coal smoke. In the air, I imagine it passing now, windows lit, wheels turning over the rails, heading toward places I cannot see from here, carrying its own quiet stories away into the night. I stand and walk to the flap, lifting it just enough to look. Out, the camp is washed in silver light from the thin moon above. The rows of tents lie still, their ropes drawn taut. A breath of wind moves through the grass, bending it all in one direction before letting it rise again. The sentry passes at his usual pace, nodding once as he goes by. Beyond him, the open. Land runs into shadow. The horizon softened until it disappears into the sky. I let the flap fall closed and return to the stool. The stove hums quietly, the heat still holding firm in its iron frame. I set my hands on my knees and listen. Not for anything in particular, but for the way all the sounds fit together, the wind against the canvas, the faint ticking of cooling metal, the steady pulse of boots on the earth outside, each one a thread in the wide fabric of the night, woven slow and without end. I lean forward slightly on the stool. The warmth of the stove gathers against my chest in a slow, steady drift. The air in the tent is still except for the faint curl of heat rising from the pot, each wisp fading as it reaches the cooler air above. The lantern swings just enough to let its light brush over the table, then back again into the shallow shadow. I draw a slow breath. The scent of the stew has settled deeper now, mixed with the faint dryness of the firewood. Outside, the camp remains quiet. Only the measured tread of the sentry marks the passing minutes. The sound is joined once by the muffled creak of leather straps. Perhaps a horse shifting in its stall beyond the line of tents. I picture the animals standing head to tail, their breath making pale clouds in the night air. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once. The sound breaks against the stillness, then fades. Without reply, I take the last of the bread halves from the crate, wrap them once more in the cloth, and set them beside the covered pot. They will keep their warmth for a little longer. Enough for whoever finds them first at dawn. The knife is wiped again, though it hardly needs it. The habit is much a part of the work as the cutting itself. The board rests back in its place against the wall, its grain catching a line of light. From the swaying lantern, the embers shift, sending a faint crackle into the quiet. I rise to stir them gently with the poker. The ash glows orange where the iron passes through. A small flame licks up between the logs, catches for a moment, then folds back into the coals. I set the poker aside and close the small door. The sound of the latch falling into place is sharp, but not loud. Returning to the stool, I rest my forearms on my knees and let my gaze settle. On the pot, its lid moves slightly with each rise of steam. The rhythm unhurried, as though it knows the night will last as long as it needs to. I stay with that rhythm for a while, letting it guide the slow drift of thought that comes in these hours when there is nothing left to do but keep the fire. The minutes pass without measure, the fire holding steady, the lantern casting its quiet arc across the canvas wall. I hear the sentry's steps fade into the far end of the track, then return, always with the same pace, the same weight. Beyond him, the land is open and silent. Fields lying still under the pale wash of moonlight. The hedgerow bends slightly in the wind, each leaf turning its edge to the air before settling. Back again, I pour the last of the tea into my cup. It is cooler now, but the taste is the same, earthy, faintly sweet. I drink it in slow swallows, each one leaving behind a thin warmth that lingers longer than expected. The empty cup rests on the table, its rim catching a glint from the lantern. I turn it slightly so the handle faces outward, a habit from the kitchen, making it ready for the next hand that might take it. From somewhere beyond the camp, a faint metallic sound drifts in. Perhaps a gate swinging once on its hinge it does not repeat. The night folds back around it as though it had never been there. I think of the small farms scattered beyond the lines, their windows dark, their stoves gone to ash hours ago, only. The slow breathing of the barns and the soft stirrings of animals breaking the stillness. The stove sighs faintly, a log settling deeper into the bed of coals. I watch the faint red light shift under the grate, rising and falling like the quiet pulse of a sleeping thing. The air inside the tent is warm enough to keep the chill from the bones, yet still touched. At the edges by the cool breath of the night, I pull the coat a little tighter across my shoulders, feeling the weight of it as another layer between me and the world beyond the canvas. The lantern sways once more, its chain giving the faintest creak as it shifts. Light moves over the stacked bowls, catching the rim of each in a thin line before sliding away again. The bread sits wrapped on the table, holding what little warmth remains, a promise for the first hands to reach it in the morning. The pot sends up another slow wisp of steam, the scent mixing with the dry, smoky air from the stove outside. The sentry passes again, his shadow crossing the flap in a brief, silent arc. His boots press a steady path into the earth, the sound fading, then returning as he makes his turn. Somewhere beyond the tents, the wind brushes over the open fields, carrying with it the faint smell of damp soil and cut grass. It slips under the canvas walls, curling around my boots before lifting toward the low ceiling. I rest my hands together, fingers laced loosely, feeling the faint heat still in my skin. From the cup of tea, the quiet stretches on without pressing. Not heavy, not empty, just present, each sound within it seems to belong. The shifting coals, the moving air, the distant step, I find myself breathing in time with it. Slow, even as though matching the pace of the night itself, the fire holds steady, the embers deep and red beneath their thin layer of ash. I know they will last until dawn without much tending, only the occasional stir to keep them breathing. The work of the day is finished, the kitchen in order, the bread ready, the stew waiting. All that remains is to sit here a little longer and keep company with the fire until the first light reaches the camp. The hours between midnight and morning have their own shape, stretched and quiet, yet steady as a slow tide. The camp lies in its deepest rest. No voices now, only the measured sound of boots from the sentry and the faint rustle of canvas in the wind. I shift on the stool just enough to ease my back. The wood warm where I've been sitting, the coat over my shoulders holds the heat in place. The kind of warmth that asks for no movement, only stillness. I glance toward the flap. Its edge lifts slightly with each breath of wind, then settles again. Beyond it, the sky has begun to lose its sharp black. A softer blue creeps in so gradually it's hard to mark the moment it began. The lantern light grows gentler against the walls. Less needed now, though I let it burn. It casts one last thin shadow of the pot's handle across the table. a shape I've seen every night in its own quiet place. The bread waits under its cloth. I press a hand to it lightly and feel the faintest trace of heat still there. The pot, though lower now, still gives off its scent, richer than it was at sunset, thick with the hours it has spent over the fire. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster calls once, the sound small against the open fields, but certain in its meaning. The day is on its way. Though the camp still belongs to the night for a little while longer, I add one small stick of wood to the stove, enough to wake the embers. Without rushing them, the flame catches slowly, its light joining the lanterns in a warm, shifting glow. I lean back again, listening to the way the new wood changes the fire's voice. A low crackle at first, then a steady hum. Outside, the sentry passes once more. His step is even now as it was at dusk, holding the same patient rhythm that has carried the night. The pale edge of dawn begins to gather at the horizon, just a faint wash of color behind the dark line of the trees. It seeps slowly upward, turning the sky from deep blue to a softer gray. The lantern's glow feels dimmer now, not because it has weakened, but because the world beyond the canvas is growing lighter. I let it hang a little longer, its warmth adding to the last quiet moments before the camp stirs. The pot sends up a final thin ribbon of steam, the scent of the broth mingling with the cooler air that slips in through the flap. I lift the lid and stir once, slowly. The sound of the ladle against the tin is soft, unhurried. The stew has thickened overnight, the flavors bound together. In the long hours of gentle heat, it is ready without needing anything more from me. The work now is only to serve it. When the first hands appear, the bread rests under its cloth. I draw it back and see the crust catching the early light. Its surface is firm, but the inside still carries the softness it had when it came from the oven the day before. I set it near the board, the knife beside it, ready for the first cut. Of the morning, the table is otherwise clear. Only the cup from the night remains, its rim catching the faintest glint from the growing day outside. A bird calls once from the hedgerow. Another answers from somewhere nearer the stream. The sentry's steps approach again, slower now, as though he too feels the night giving way. He passes the flap and glances inside, just a brief nod, then back to his path. The camp is still, but not for much longer. The first light will reach the rows of tents soon, and the quiet will lift. The gray light strengthens with each passing minute. Shapes outside the tent gain their edges again. The ropes, the poles, the lines of the nearby wagons all stand clearer against the soft horizon. I step to the flap and lift it slightly. The air that meets me is cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet grass. Across the field, a thin mist clings low to the ground, drifting slowly as though reluctant to leave. A faint stir comes from one of the nearer tents, the sound of a man shifting in his cot. Another tent gives a muffled cough, then stillness again. The camp is stretching in its own slow way. The horses beyond the hedgerow begin to move, a few hooves striking the packed ground, tails swishing once. Their breath rises in pale clouds, breaking apart as the morning breeze moves through. I let the flap fall closed and return to the stove. The flame inside is steady now. The log I placed earlier has settled into a glowing bed of embers, small cracks showing where the heat runs deepest. I slide the pot a little closer to the hotter side, just enough to wake the broth without rushing. The sound of a slow bubble rises once or twice, each one sending a soft wisp of scent into the air. The bread waits. I cut the first slice carefully, the crust giving way with a faint, crisp sound. Steam escapes from the cut, carrying with it the faint sweetness of the grain. I place the slice on the board, knowing it will be taken quickly. Once the first man steps in, the knife rests beside it, ready for the next cut, steady on the worn surface of the wood. The mist outside begins to thin, pulling back from the field in slow, uneven drifts. The first pale gold of the sun touches the tops of the trees, their branches catching the light before the ground does. From somewhere at the edge of camp comes the low murmur of voices, quiet at first, then joined by the sound of boots on the packed earth. A wagon wheel creaks once as its weight shifts, the horses giving a short snort in answer. I ladle a small portion of the stew into a tin bowl, tasting it before anyone else arrives. It is rich and deep from the night's slow cooking. The vegetables soft, the broth warm and steady. The heat spreads from my mouth to my chest in an easy wave, a comfort that asks for nothing more. I set the bowl aside for the first man on duty, knowing the warmth will meet him as he comes in from the morning air. The camp's stillness is beginning to lift. Canvas flaps open here and there, letting out faint shapes of men stepping into the light. A cough, a quiet laugh, the faint sound of water being poured into a basin, all of it folding together into the shape of a waking day. I cut another slice of bread, laying it beside the first, the cloth pulled back far enough to show the rest of the loaf. The table now holds its quiet welcome, simple, ready, without need for words. Through the small gap in the flap, I see the sentry speaking to his relief, their voices low but carrying the weight of the night's watch. The man coming off duty will be the first to sit here. The steam from the bowl will rise to meet him, and I will pour him tea from the kettle, letting the warmth find its way back into his hands. The day has begun, but for a little while longer it still carries the calm that the night left behind. The first man steps in, the flap lifting just enough to let in a strip of cool air. His face is drawn from the hours of steady pacing, but his eyes soften at the sight of the table. I slide the bowl toward him, the bread placed within reach, the steam curling up between us. He nods once in quiet thanks, lowering himself onto the stool as though the weight of the night is finally allowed to settle. I pour the tea, its thin stream dark against the tin, the sound brief but certain. The cup rests easily in his hands. He leans forward slightly, letting the warmth rise toward his face. For a few minutes, neither of us speaks. The only sounds are the clink of his spoon and the faint shift of fabric as he eats. Outside, the murmur of the camp grows, boots passing, voices exchanging short greetings. Another figure appears at the flap, this one still pulling on his jacket. I set a bowl for him before. He's fully inside, the bread ready beside it, the kettle close at hand. The rhythm of the morning takes shape, a bowl, a slice, a pour, each motion following the last without thought. The stove gives its steady heat, the lantern now dim in the growing light. Yet I leave it burning until the sun fully takes its place. More men come, each carrying the air of sleep slowly shaken off. Some eat quickly before their duties, others linger a moment, letting the warmth hold them still. The bread lowers by, the slice. The stew thins in the pot, though there will be enough until the last man arrives, and all the while Beyond the tent walls, the day begins to move in full. Carts rolling, water drawn, voices steady and sure. The sun clears the low line of trees. Its light spills across the field, turning the damp grass to a muted gold. Shadows shorten and soften. The mist is nearly gone, clinging only in the hollows where the light has yet to reach. From the tent flap I can see men gathering near the wagons, some loading crates, others checking harnesses. The metallic ring of a hammer carries from somewhere further down the line. Sharp against the morning air, inside, the flow of men has steadied. Those who have eaten move on, and new faces take their place, each bowl returned empty. The bread now down to its last quarter loaf beneath the folded cloth. The pot's surface shows the bottom with each ladle. Yet the scent remains rich. Holding the room in its quiet warmth, I scrape the sides to gather the last of it. Each serving met with the same quiet nod as the first. The kettle empties more slowly. Tea poured in smaller amounts now, just enough for those who ask. Its warmth is softer than the stew's. Less filling, more a gentle weight in the hands. The men drink as they stand near the stove, speaking in low tones, sharing words too, quiet to carry beyond their circle. Outside, the camp is fully awake. The sound of movement constant now, though not hurried. When the last man comes, I give him the final slice of bread, the crust still holding the faintest touch of heat. The pot is nearly empty, but it is enough. He takes it without hesitation. I wipe the ladle and set it aside, resting it on the board as though laying a tool to sleep. The morning work is done. The table cleared, the stove still warm, the tent carrying the easy air of a task well finished. The light in the tent has changed. No longer the dim gold of the lantern, but the clear, even glow of the morning sun filtering through canvas. I unhook the lantern and set it on the shelf. Its flame flickers once before I pinch it out, leaving only the steady daylight. The air feels different now, cooler in places where the breeze finds its way in, warmer where the stove still breathes. Outside, the horses stamp their hooves, the sound carrying the weight of animals ready to move. I step to the flap and look beyond the rows of tents. The field stretches open, the wagons aligned in quiet order. Men walk between them with steady purpose, their voices lifted just enough to be heard over the creak of wood and the shift of gear. Far off, the line of trees marks the edge of our little world here. Beyond them lies the road, and beyond the road, whatever comes next, the smell of fresh earth rises with the sun, mingling with the sharper scent of leather and iron from the tack. I turn back inside. The stove needs little now, just a small piece of wood to hold its heat until midday. The bread crate is empty save for a few crumbs. I brush them into my hand and scatter them just outside the flap. A small bird finds them almost at once, hopping close without fear, its head tilting as it pecks. It stays only a moment before darting away. A flash of gray-brown against the brighter grass. The table is bare except for the kettle, its handle warm but no longer hot. I lift it, swish the last mouthful of water around, then pour it onto the ground outside. The dark patch soaking in quickly. There is a stillness now, not the stillness of night, but of a morning where the first rush has passed, and for a brief moment the camp feels like it's holding its breath before the day truly begins. Call rises from near the wagons, brief and clear, followed by the creak of wheels as the first one begins to roll. Men answer with short shouts, not in alarm, but in the clipped rhythm of work, their boots pressing new lines into the damp earth. The horses shift in unison, the harnesses giving a soft jingle. The sound mingles with the low murmur of voices. From where I stand at the flap, the movement looks steady. Nothing rushed, each man knowing his place in the chain. I step outside for a moment. The air is fresh and cool, the sun warm on my face. A thin line of smoke from another stove drifts above the tents, carrying the scent of wood and faint ash. Beyond the hedgerow, the fields stretch into a haze of pale green, the dew still clinging to the grass where the light has yet to burn it away. Somewhere far off a bell rings once, soft and distant, its tone carried more by the air than by volume. Back inside, I close the flap halfway, letting in the light, but keeping the wind from pushing too hard. The stove's warmth has softened, now more a quiet presence than a working fire. I take the pot from its place and set it aside, the blackened bottom cool enough to touch now. With a cloth I wipe the table once, the grain of the wood showing faint scars from years of use. The morning's work has left the tent smelling of bread and stew, a scent that will fade slowly as the day moves on. Outside, the sound of the departing wagons grows fainter, replaced by the lighter noises of the camp settling into its daytime pace. I sit for a moment on the stool, letting my hands rest on my knees, the weight of the morning easing out of my shoulders. And though the day is still young, it already feels like a chapter has closed. Making room for whatever comes next, a few voices drift in from beyond the flap, men speaking of the road ahead, of towns passed through long ago. Their words are easy, unhurried, the kind spoken when the hardest work of the morning is already behind them. Now and then, a short laugh breaks through, low and warm, carrying a brief echo before fading into the open air. I find myself listening without meaning to, not to the details, but to the tone, the sound of men anchored in the present moment. From somewhere down the line, a hammer strikes metal, the ring sharp and clear, repeating in a steady rhythm. Each strike is followed by a short pause, enough to hear the faint rustle of the wind before the sound comes again. A pair of pigeons circle above the camp, their wings giving off a soft clap each time they change direction. They settle on the ridge of a wagon canvas, watching the ground below with the still patience of birds who have seen mornings like this before. Inside, the quiet deepens again, the stove's faint heat settling low, the air cooler now in the corners of the tent. I set the kettle aside for cleaning. Its inside ringed faintly where the tea sat through the night. The lantern rests on the shelf, its glass catching a shard of sunlight through a seam in the canvas. Dust moves lazily in the beam, rising, falling, never quite landing before it drifts away again. Beyond the flap, the camp is steady. No hurry, no loud commands, only the kind of movement that keeps the day turning. A cart passes slowly, its wheels pressing into the soft earth. With a muted creak, the driver nods as he goes by, one hand loose on the reins, the other resting on his knee, and as the sound fades, the air feels open again, carrying only the quiet patterns of a morning well begun. The sun has risen high enough now to warm the canvas walls. A pale glow spreads evenly across the tent's interior. Shadows have softened, their edges blurred by the steady daylight. I stand and stretch slowly, the kind of stretch that pulls gently at the shoulders and back without urgency. The air inside is still touched by the scent of the morning's bread, faint now but lingering in the wood of the table and the cloth. From the open flap, I can see a small group gathered near the supply crates. One man counting aloud, another marking on a scrap of paper. Their voices are calm, their work unbroken by haste. Each crate lifted and set down with care. A dog trots past them, tail swaying, pausing only to sniff at the base of a wagon before moving on. Its path takes it toward the tents, where it disappears behind the line without a sound. I return to the stove, lifting its lid just enough to see the dim red of the embers beneath. They glow faintly, enough to give off a small breath of heat, but no longer asking for fuel. I lower the lid again, letting the warmth fade in its own time. The work of fire finished for now. The pot and ladle rest on the side table, ready for cleaning when the bucket is brought in from the well. Outside, the light has taken on the clear tone of late morning, sharper without the softness of dawn. Men walk with a steadier pace now, the first tasks behind them, the rest of the day unfolding in quiet order. The clink of metal on metal carries from somewhere near the far fence. Perhaps gear being set aside or repaired, and over it all lies the same measured calm, a rhythm unbroken since the first pale light touched the camp. A faint breeze slips through the half-open flap. It moves the edge of the cloth in slow, steady swings. With it comes the scent of trampled grass and faint wood smoke from a stove still burning somewhere down the line. The sound of distant voices drifts in, softened by the open air. Nothing urgent, just the quiet exchange of men at work. Somewhere beyond the hedgerow, a bird sings in short bursts. Its pauses as measured as its calls. I take the kettle to the doorway and look out toward the well. The rope hangs still, the bucket resting against the post. A man approaches it from the far side, his steps slow, his cap pushed back to keep the sun from his eyes. He lowers the bucket with the familiar squeak of the pulley, the sound small against the openness of the field. When he draws it up, the water catches the light in a quick silver flash before settling dark again in the shadow of the rim. I step back inside, setting the kettle down on the board. It's metal, cool now beneath my hand. The table holds only a few crumbs from the morning loaf. I brush them into my palm and scatter them near the flap. In moments, a sparrow drops to the ground to take them, its head moving in small, sharp motions as it eats. It leaves as quickly as it came, vanishing into the low grass where the sunlight pools. The camp beyond is steady. No raised voices, no heavy noise, only the low weave of movement and rest. A wagon stands in place now, its team unharnessed and grazing. The driver sits on the wheel's edge, watching the field without speaking. The warmth of the sun seeps deeper into the canvas walls, blurring the cool of the early air, and I feel the day's long stretch ahead, quiet and unbroken for now, as though time itself has decided to move more slowly here. The shadows outside have shortened. The sun now stands high enough to cast its light evenly across the camp. The grass glints in patches where dew still clings in the shaded hollows, each drop catching a flash of brightness before fading. From somewhere near the far end of the tents comes the hollow thud of a mallet, its rhythm slow and steady. Each strike is followed by a pause, as if the man working there is taking his time with every placement. I shift the stool closer to the open flap. The air that moves through is warmer now, carrying the scent of soil beginning to dry. Across the field, two men walk side by side, their hands resting loosely at their sides. Their heads tilt toward one another in easy conversation, the kind that needs no rush to reach its end. Behind them, the wagons stand in a patient row, their wheels still, their canvas tops stirring faintly in the breeze. Inside, the kettle waits, empty but clean, its shape catching a strip of sunlight along the curve of its side. The stove holds only a faint heat now, more memory than presence. I rest my hand on the lid for a moment, feeling the last trace of warmth before it slips away entirely. On the table, the cloth from the bread loaf lies folded, the faint scent of grain clinging to its fibers. A gull passes overhead, its call sharp but solitary. The sound fades almost as soon as it is made. The camp absorbs it without breaking its rhythm. Men moving between tasks with quiet steadiness. Somewhere beyond the hedgerow, the faint sound of flowing water reaches my ear. Too far to see, but enough to mark its place. And I sit there a little longer, letting the morning turn fully toward midday without need to move. The light has shifted to its full midday strength, bright, even, and without the long shadows of the early hours. The canvas walls glow faintly in the sun, their seams casting thin lines of shadow that stretch straight down to the ground. From the open flap, the field looks still, only the slow sway of the taller grasses showing where the breeze passes. The air is warmer now, carrying the dry scent of dust rising from the paths between the tents. Near the supply wagons, a pair of men sit on overturned crates. One whittles at a piece of wood, the other simply watches. The shavings fall in light curls to the ground, each one catching a glint of sunlight before it settles in the dirt. Now and then they speak a word or two, but mostly they are quiet, their comfort in the silence plain to see. A third man passes by carrying a coil of rope over his shoulder. He nods to them without breaking stride. Inside the tent, the heat from outside is softened by the shade. The air is still, but not heavy. I take the folded bread cloth and tuck it neatly into the crate for the next loaf. The table is bare now except for the kettle, which catches the light in a pale arc along its rim. The stove sits cold, its work for the day done. The smell of the morning's fire still faint in the air. From somewhere beyond the tree line, a crow calls once, the sound deep and carrying. Its echo fades into the quiet hum of the camp, the shuffle of boots, the occasional creak of wood. Nothing presses for attention. No urgent voice, no sudden movement. Only the slow, steady passing of the day, as though time here prefers to linger rather than hurry. A wagon wheel turns slowly somewhere beyond the row of tents, its wooden spokes giving a soft, rhythmic creak. The sound grows, then fades again, swallowed by the open air, leaving only the murmur of quiet conversations scattered through the camp. From the flap, I can see a pair of horses standing in the shade of a canvas awning. Their tails flick lazily at the summer flies. One shifts its weight, the leather straps on its harness giving a faint jingle that carries farther than expected. Near the fence line, a man kneels beside a crate, sorting through small metal tools laid out on a folded cloth. Each piece catches a flash of sunlight as he turns it in his hands, setting it in careful order. He works without hurry, pausing now and then to glance toward the road as if expecting something. Nothing appears, and he returns to his sorting, his movements as steady as the day itself. Inside, I pour a small measure of water into the kettle. The sound is quiet, almost lost in the stillness. It rests on the table, the surface inside catching a shimmer from the open flap. The stool beneath me feels smooth and familiar, its legs uneven enough to shift slightly each time I move. The scent of dry grass drifts in from outside, mingled with the faint tang of iron from the tools nearby above. The sky is an unbroken blue. No clouds to mark the hours, only the slow arc of the sun. The warmth through the canvas has softened, settling into a steady comfort. And here in this small corner of the camp, the world holds its pace, unchanging, unhurried, quietly certain somewhere down the path a bucket tips into a trough. The rush of water splashes loud for a moment before settling into quiet ripples. A horse lowers its head to drink, the slow pull of its breath lifting and falling with each swallow. The wooden boards of the trough creak faintly under the shift of weight, then grow still again. A fly buzzes close to the flap of the tent before drifting away toward the brighter air beyond. Two men walk past, their boots pressing a dry crunch into the packed earth. They speak in low tones. One gestures loosely toward the wagons, while the other nods without lifting his gaze from the ground. Their conversation fades with their steps, replaced by the distant ring of metal on metal from the far edge of camp. It comes at irregular intervals now, less the rhythm of work and more the lingering tap of someone finishing a task. Inside, the light has taken on a muted gold, the canvas filtering the full glare of the sun into something softer. The kettle sits where I left it, the thin water. Inside, still catching the faintest motion from the breeze. The air is warm but easy to breathe, touched now and then by a cooler thread that slips in from a half-open flap. On the table, the grain of the wood shows every mark and scratch from years of use. A quiet history written without words beyond the tents. A cart rattles briefly over a rough patch of ground before finding the smoother path again. Its sound grows faint, leaving the camp in its steady calm. And I remain seated, letting the hours pass as they will, with no need to count them, only to feel their weight in the stillness. A shadow drifts across the ground outside the flap, a gull gliding low before rising again toward the open sky. Its call is brief, carried far on the warm air before fading into the distance. Near the fence, a small group stands in a loose circle, speaking in turns, their voices soft enough that only the rise and fall of tone reaches me. One man shifts his cap back, rubbing at his brow before folding his arms and listening again. From the direction of the tree line comes the faint rustle of leaves, the breeze there moving differently than it does here in the open field. It carries a cooler edge, touched with the scent of damp bark and shaded earth. Somewhere unseen, a branch creaks softly, the sound breaking once, then holding still. The camp absorbs it without pause, its rhythm unchanged. Inside the tent, the air holds steady, warm without pressing, quiet without being empty. The kettle rests on the table, its rim glinting when the flap sways just enough to let the light shift. I lean back slightly on the stool, feeling the familiar balance of its uneven legs. The sounds from outside drift in and out. A shuffle of boots, a murmur of talk, the faint sigh of rope tightening under weight. Above, the sky is still clear, though the color has deepened a shade since morning. The sun has begun its slow tilt toward the west, though it has not yet softened its heat. And as I sit there, I feel the long stretch of the day ahead. A quiet road without turns, leading only toward the dusk that will come in its own time. The light now carries the first hints of afternoon, warmer in tone, laying longer shapes across the ground. Shadows from the wagons stretch toward the tents, thin at the edges where the sun slips past. Somewhere nearby, a canteen is set down on wood, the hollow tap sounding once before the quiet returns. A man hums faintly as he walks by, the tune simple and without hurry, fading after only a few steps. I take a slow drink from my own cup. The water is cool, the taste touched faintly by the tin. Outside, the air moves with a steadier rhythm. The breeze no longer sharp, but smooth in its passing. A scrap of paper lifts from near the fence. Spinning once before settling flat against the earth, it stays there, unmoving, as though it had found a place to rest inside. The scent of the morning's bread has faded almost entirely. Only the faint warmth of the canvas remains. The table is clear, the kettle dry, the stove cold. Each thing set in its place without thought. Through the half-open flap, the field lies still. A thin haze at its far edge softens the line of the horizon. Somewhere beyond that, unseen roads carry the wagons and the men who left with them. The camp holds to its quiet work. Nothing loud, nothing sudden, only the small movements that mark the hours. And as I sit in the low light, I feel the day leaning gently toward its close. Not yet there, but already carrying the calm that comes before evening settles in. The sun tilts lower now, its light slipping between the tents in narrow golden paths. Shadows deepen where the canvas folds, their edges soft as if painted by hand. From beyond the camp, the faint call of a Huron drifts in, long and low, carrying over the stillness. Somewhere a rope is pulled taut, the fibers groaning softly before falling slack again. Men move more slowly now, their steps unhurried, voices even quieter than before. A pair sit against the side of a wagon, one leaning back with his eyes closed, the other tracing lines in the dirt with a stick. The smell of cooling earth begins to rise as the day's heat eases. A soft gust stirs the grass, bending it in one smooth motion before letting it stand again. Inside, the air has cooled just enough to notice. The canvas no longer warm beneath my hand. The kettle rests where it has been all afternoon, untouched yet steady in its place. I shift on the stool, the wood creaking faintly under the change of weight. The flap sways with the breeze, each movement letting in a flicker of fading sunlight. Beyond the fence, the fields glow in the last strength of the day. The sky has begun its slow turn toward dusk, and here in the camp, time feels suspended, held in the long breath between the labor of the day and the quiet of the night to come. The horizon has taken on the first colors of evening, a faint wash of amber and rose stretching above the darkening fields. Shadows have grown long and smooth, weaving between the tents and wagons. Somewhere, a ladle dips into a pot, the soft splash of liquid followed by the muted clink of metal. Against metal, the smell of something warm drifts faintly on the air. Simple fare, enough to mark the coming of night. A few voices rise in low conversation near the fire pit, their tones gentle, each word spaced with unhurried pauses. One man chuckles quietly at something said, the sound carrying only a short distance, before folding back into the calm. From farther off, the slow steps of a horse cross the packed earth, its shoes tapping lightly in a rhythm that fades into silence. The rope at the hitching post sways once, then lies still. Inside, the light has thinned to a soft glow. The canvas walls hold the last of the day's color. I rest my hands on the table, feeling the smooth grain beneath my fingertips. The kettle, cool now, reflects only the dim shape of the flap and the shadows beyond it. The air smells faintly of grass, dust, and the first hints of smoke from the evening fires. Beyond the camp, the sky darkens by slow degrees, and with it, the sounds of the day grow fewer, replaced by the quiet rhythm of night settling in. The world outside narrows to the circle of the camp and the steady comfort of its unbroken peace. The first stars begin to appear, faint pinpricks. Above the fading glow on the horizon, the sky holds both day and night for a moment. Pale gold low to the west, deep blue overhead. A lantern is lit near the supply crates. Its light sways gently as someone carries it toward the far row of tents. The flame flickers with each step, casting brief, soft shadows that stretch and vanish in turn. Near the fire pit, a pot simmers quietly. The slow rise of steam curls into the cooling air. The smell is richer now. Carrying a mix of herbs and grain, men gather in small groups, their words quieter still. Some speaking, others simply listening with eyes half closed. The crackle of the fire fills the spaces between, steady and unhurried. Inside the tent, the air has cooled further. The canvas no longer warm to the touch. I sit with my back straight for a moment before leaning forward, resting my forearms on the table. The kettle remains in its place, its surface touched now only by the faintest glint of lamplight from outside. The sound of a night insect begins near the flap, a steady, pulsing rhythm that feels as though it has always been there. The camp is wrapped in this quiet now, every movement slower, every sound softer, and the night seems ready to take its place fully, without resistance, in the gentle turning of the hours. The sky has deepened to a full, quiet blue. The last traces of daylight gone beyond the horizon. Lanterns glow at soft intervals through the camp, their light pooling on the ground in small golden circles. The fire burns low now, its crackle steady but gentle, sending thin streams of smoke upward to dissolve into the dark. A few final voices murmur nearby, each word slow and drawn out, fading into the comfort of shared silence. A horse shifts at the edge of camp, the faint jingle of its harness breaking. The stillness for only a moment. The night air is cool and calm, touched with the sense of earth, smoke, and distant grass. Somewhere beyond the fence, an owl calls once, the sound low and certain before the quiet takes hold again. The insect song has grown steady, a soft backdrop that feels endless in its rhythm. Inside, the tent is dim, the table bare, the kettle still, the air settled into an easy stillness. I let my eyes rest on the faint sway of the flap, each movement slower than the last. There is no rush to think of tomorrow. The day has found its close, and the night has taken its place. And so I sit, breathing in the calm, letting the steady quiet of the camp carry me into rest. The camp now rests in full stillness. The lanterns have been dimmed, and their glow has softened to a faint amber. Only the embers of the fire remain, pulsing gently with the slow breath of the night breeze. Tents stand unmoving, their lines slack but steady, the fabric whispering now and then when the wind passes through. Somewhere in the distance, a branch gives a soft creak before the quiet closes over it again. The horses are still, their breathing deep and even. Tails flick only in the rarest. Moments a low murmur comes from one tent, the voice of someone speaking in sleep, fading before the words can be known. Above, the stars are sharper now, each one fixed in its place. The sky, a dark ocean without waves, the insect song is unbroken, weaving its steady pattern through the open air. Inside, the canvas walls hold the cool night air. The table and stool are only shapes in the dark, the kettle no more than a shadow among shadows. I close my eyes, hearing only the far-off rustle of leaves and the even rhythm of my own breath. And in this quiet, deep, still, and without weight, the hours pass unnoticed, carrying the camp gently toward the first light of another day.